Webinar with Madhu Kishore ji. I know it's a Saturday morning in some places, Saturday night in some other places. So hopefully we're all attentive and we can really could take home a lot of the messages that Madhuji has to give us. So real quick, I just wanted to thank Bharatiyam and Awaz for putting this together and inviting me to moderate, as well as ask questions to Madhuji and interact about this serious topic that we're going to discuss. So quick announcements. At any point during the talk, if you have any questions, please use either the chat if you're in Zoom to ask the questions, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you may use the comment section to type in your questions. And time permitting, hopefully we will get to all the questions so that Madhuji can interact with every one of you. I hope that is clear. So today's speaker is, as I already said, Madhu Kishore ji. She's originally from Delhi in Bharat. She graduated from Delhi University and did her post-graduation from now the ever-famous Jawaharlal Nehru University, also known as JNU. In 1978, Madhuji started Manushi with the aim of finding effective solutions for the economic, political, and social problems that are confronting India through patient study, a nonpartisan approach, live interaction with the people concerned, and culturally sensitive, informed activism. Madhuji is logging in here tonight from Delhi. So I hope we're all have a pen and paper and ready to take notes. Madhuji, it's all on you.
Namaste, everybody. I don't know how many of you are there, but I guess people will join in slowly. It's not easy to address an audience that you don't know very much about. I have no idea how many of you have studied this topic, worked on it. Some of you may be far better informed than me. And for many others, it may well be that they have a nodding acquaintance with it and a lot of emotional attachment to the issue of uniform civil code. So if I sound simplistic, oversimplistic for those who are more knowledgeable than me, please forgive me. And those of you who have difficulty to tune in to some of the off the beaten track ideas I'm going to present, well, listen to me with an open mind, because I'm obsessed. I'm one of those who's obsessed with finding solutions, not just dwelling on problems. I'm one of those who has worked hard working on these issues for the last many decades. So give a little allowance for that experience, for that intense involvement. This has been my life, trying to find solutions to some of the pressing problems. And I'm sure most of you will agree that the stalemate over the Uniform Civil Code, the continuing stalemate over the Uniform Civil Code, has become one of the most divisive issues in our society, though it should not have been, because essentially Uniform Civil Code means treating everybody at par, not privileging some and discriminating against the others. Now, before I tell you how I think the problem can be solved, I want to firstly start with giving you a status report on where the matter stands with regard to this contentious issues. Many people think that this whole tussle started with the Shah Banu case judgment of the Supreme Court, which was then bypassed in favor of a new law that the Congress party enacted in the name of protection of Muslim women's rights. But it was, firstly, it trashed the Supreme Court judgment on the Shah Banu case, whereby several important statements had been made. And also, gave everybody this feeling that, including the Muslim community, that they stand above the Constitution of India and the law of the land. But this was not the first time. In fact, this was not the first time this happened. In fact, the demand for a uniform civil code was raised way back in 1950s when the Hindu Code Bill was introduced in the parliament with the view to reforming Hindu personal laws and codifying and reforming. And at that time, BJP and RSS were not even marginal presence or even Jan Sangh or the earlier avatars. But the toughest opposition to the Hindu Code Bill came from within the Congress party. And some of those who opposed what was happening and the partisan approach, namely, why are you singling out Hindus for reform? Why not go for uniform civil code, especially since the directive principles of the Indian Constitution laid down very clearly that the state shall endeavor to pass a uniform civil code. So a lot of Nehru's own colleagues raised this point, including Babasaheb Ambedkar, many other stalwarts. They were extremely unhappy, not just over the fact that the Hindu community was being singled out as if it was the only one in need of reform and the others could not be touched. Secondly, even more importantly, the reform of Hindu law was very ill-informed. Typical Macaulay Putras, led by Nehru, had initiated this move. Their criticism, their critique of the Hindu personal laws was ill-informed and reeking with prejudice. And several parliamentarians, especially from the south, from the north, from the east, regions that were unfamiliar to this English-educated Macaulite elite that led this road roller campaign against Hindu personal law, people did try to point out that unless you know the ground reality, what's actually operating at the ground, to try and reform a law could do more harm than good. And that's exactly what happened. But today is not the day to talk about Hindu law reform. I hope we can have another session on that subject, something I've worked on for long years, and I've also published papers. I'll send you links to those papers, one of which was published in the Economic and Political Weekly. Now, so the stalemate started right then. The protests against singling out of Hindu community while leaving others alone started right then, and there was strong protest from within the Congress party. They didn't come from so-called right wing and therefore trashed easily in the way that Congress is prone to do. But coming to the present day, let me give you a quick run through. In 2014, the BJP manifesto reiterated the promise to go for a uniform civil code as a measure of gender justice. They said there can't be gender justice in society until a uniform civil code is introduced. In other words, the focus is on Muslim women, giving them justice. They didn't bring in any communal angle or any Hindu-Muslim angle to it. In 2016, Shaira Bano, Afreen Rahman, and Gulshan Praveen, three Muslim women, approached the Supreme Court with a PIL challenging talaq-e-biddat, or the practice of instant triple talaq. This is important. They're not challenging Muslim personal law per se. They only challenged talaq-e-biddat, which is talaq, 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 instant divorce, by uttering those three words. It's very arbitrary, etc. But the others, the talaq-e-ihsan and another one, which are very similar, they also triple talaq, which is 3 times you utter the word, but with a gap of, say, within 3 months you have to utter, and within those 3 months you should not resume marital contact or any physical contact, or you have to stay away from marital relations. That's the condition. But Talaq-e-biddat is all that they challenged. In other words, they were challenging the customary practices that had crept in India, saying these are corrupt practices. Quran does not recognize talaq-e-biddat. We want to be governed by genuine Islamic law, whereas this is a corruption of it. And they pointed out that many of the Muslim countries, including theocratic Islamic states, have outlawed talaq-e-biddat. They do not give it sanction. But of course, in India, the Muslim leaders, community leaders, both political and religious leaders, hold on to talaq-e-biddat as if it's the most sacred word of Allah himself, and they can't let go. Even a comma full stop is not allowed to be added to that sacred provision. Now, August 22, 2017, a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court delivered what I would call an extremely tortured verdict. It was a constitutional bench of 5 judges, with 3 judges declaring triple talaq to be unconstitutional, while 2 judges, including the Chief Justice of Supreme Court, Justice Keir, declared that it cannot be called unconstitutional because Article 14 and 15, which were invoked by Shaira Bano and others, they apply only to state action. In other words, it's only when the state discriminates, then Article 14 and 15 can be invoked, but not if your community discriminates against you or treats you unfairly. You know, this is a strange argument because it actually amounts to saying that persons from the Muslim community cannot expect protection of law codes or the constitutional rights granted to them under the Indian Constitution if their own religious or community leaders who are assured freedom to conduct their affairs as per their own value system run amok. Then you can't come to court because Article 14 and 15. This is not how they would do, this is not how they would respond if it came to Hindu social practices. But these kind of niceties and gymnastics, intellectual gymnastics, are conducted only when the Supreme Court or the political establishment is dealing with the very volatile Muslim community. Now, in December 2017, the Lok Sabha passed the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Marriage Bill. However, the bill did not see the light of day after opposition parties in the Rajya Sabha, where the BJP did not have a majority, they expressed reservations regarding provisions in the bill. And it's very important to note also this, that at the time of Shah Bano judgment, when BJP was not really playing a major role, the Congress had done a U-turn on the Supreme Court judgment in favor of Shah Bano. Almost all the leftists, almost all the feminists were in favor of the Supreme Court judgment. They were angry at the Congress party having junked the Supreme Court judgment. There was outrage against it. But the moment BJP made this as its bold promise and an election manifesto, the very same leftists, the very same secularists, the very same feminists who have been battling for equal rights for this, that, and the other, and pushing down very obnoxious laws on us without even our permission, they suddenly took a U-turn and said, oh no, this is Hindutva agenda, and therefore it's pernicious, and therefore uniform civil code is bad simply because BJP is also in favor of it. Now, since I'm one of those who've seen this from close quarters, been part of these debates and at different points, you know, these U-turns and these somersaults, political somersaults by different players are of great interest to me, and I'm documenting them in a forthcoming book of mine on precisely this issue. Now, in September 2018, the Union Cabinet approved the Muslim Women Protection of Rights Ordinance, And the reason that the BJP had to pass an ordinance is that while the Supreme Court had said that, yes, we declare this talaq-e-biddat unconstitutional, and even those who didn't say, who said it was not unconstitutional, the two dissenting judges, they both still asked the government of the day, namely the Modi government, to enact a law to get over this problem and provide relief to Muslim women who were demanding it. Now, the BJP, because it could not muster enough support in the Rajya Sabha, therefore it came up with an ordinance which went a step further than where the Supreme Court had gone in saying it's unconstitutional, talaq-e-biddat, and it needs to be reformed. But it said that the whatever is to replace has to be done by the government. We cannot legislate. This is the job of the legislature. And therefore, we had an ordinance since BJP was not in a position to bring a new law. But what is interesting is this, that none of the 5 judges questioned the validity of Muslim community being ruled by Sharia through secular courts of India, through the secular courts of India. They all acknowledged the sanctity of Sharia as far as the Muslim community is concerned. They didn't say, sorry, it's not the business of secular courts of India to be adjudicating on the basis of Sharia. So in a sense, the Supreme Court also gave not only a very diffident judgment, did not dare say this can't go on, but pass the buck on to the government. And mind you, Supreme Court doesn't do that, is not so gentle or diffident when it comes to dealing with Hindu social practices. Then the Supreme Court often goes like a bull in a china shop and doesn't care how much damage it does in the process. And I'd like to give you very briefly the summary of Justice Joseph's ruling, which gives full endorsement to Sharia-based law, even if it is unconstitutional. He says, I'm just giving you a summary. Triple talaq goes against basic tenets of Quran and violates Sharia. It is not an integral part of religion. And therefore, since triple talaq is bad in Sharia, it is bad in law. Do you see? Which is to say, give them genuine Islamic law. This is not genuine Sharia-based provision. And Chief Justice Kehar and Justice Nazir dissented, holding that the practice cannot be struck down on the ground of being violative of Article 14, since there's no state action involved in this. So, but all of them are holding the sanctity of Islamic law and Sharia as something that can't really be touched. And they asked the Union of India to frame an appropriate law. Now, since then, the BJP government, the Modi government, doesn't really know how to take the next step, even though now they did have a majority in Rajya Sabha as well. But knowing full well how volatile the issue, you saw how volatile the Muslim community became. They were ready to break up India, burn down this whole country over Citizen Amendment Act. All that CAA did was to say persecuted Hindus, Sikhs, and Christians. A few thousand of them who already landed in India seeking shelter and asylum will be given citizenship. And they went berserk, and you saw widespread riots that took place, and the attempt was to actually create a civil war. So you can well imagine how volatile the situation will be if the Modi government were to enact the Uniform Civil Code, because for last 7 decades, Muslims have been encouraged to believe, and that too by very secular progressive parties, namely the Congress and the leftists, that Their Mazhabi and their communal rights stand above the Constitution of India and the law of the land. And they've created an ecosystem whereby freedom of religion has become synonymous with allowing the most obscurantist sections of clergy to impose their undemocratic and misogynist dictates on the entire community. It's interesting that they don't want, for example, in case of rape of Muslim women, they will never say have Sharia-based provisions. Or they don't want IPC to be ruled out for Muslims. They don't want to be governed by Sharia when it comes to their crimes, even petty or big crimes. It's very selective, this love for Islamic Sharia-based law. And the strengthening of Wahhabi Islam through the power of petrodollars coming into India in recent decades has made the task that much more difficult. Had this been done in 1950s, I think it could have been managed far more easily. A lot more could have been managed at that time, including peaceful transfer of population on both sides of the border, which our government failed to do, even though the Pakistanis throughout almost all Hindus living in what came to be declared as Pakistan. But we insisted that they could live as equal citizens. But then in the process, the provisions that were made in the constitution gave the Muslim community far stronger rights, and in fact as good as a veto power on everything, that every government decision that even remotely impacts them, just as the CAA showed. It didn't impact them, and yet they think they have a veto power over all major decisions in this country. Now, the post Shah Banu consolidation, the fact that Rajiv Gandhi, with a brute majority in the Congress in the Parliament, no other party has ever had that kind of strong majority, and yet he could be made to crawl and junk the Supreme Court judgment, override it. They understood that if they create mayhem, go out on the streets, start burning, creating mayhem, any government will come to them with folded hands and bended knees. So that mindset has actually become far more consolidated, far more volatile, far more aggressive, and it's clear that Muslim leaders are itching for a bloodbath. From the time that 2014 election, when Modi seemed to be on the rise, his victory seemed imminent and certain, they've been threatening there'll be bloodbath, लाशें बिछ जाएंगी, खून की नदियां बहेंगी अगर बीजेपी आ जाती है, ये fascist है, ये communal है. All that they are actually themselves guilty of is what they attribute to the BJP, which has, if you ask me, actually bent itself backward, including Modi. In fact, if anybody has reason to be annoyed and disappointed with BJP government, Modi-led BJP government, I think it's his support base, namely the Hindu community. They feel that the interests and the voices of Hindus don't reach, but the moment Muslims come up with even the most outrageous demands, this government capitulates. Now, my take on this whole Uniform Civil Code has, I must confess, gone through several changes, because I too was a naive Gandhian way back at the time of Shah Banu. But since then, but even what I proposed at that time, I think still stands valid. And I'm going to share with you why I think we need to get out of the emotional attachment to UCC and view it very clinically. Most Hindus are very illiterate when it comes to laws. And our government has a very poor track record of formulating sensible laws. In fact, the much derided Macaulay crafted Indian Penal Code of 1861 has served us much better than any of the laws that we have enacted in post-independence India, especially with regard to social legislation. Their use by date is very short. Even before a new law has been enacted by our parliament, in the name of social justice, in the name of economic parity or whatever, even before it's been enacted, within no time, we begin hearing reports of its abuse, misuse, and inability to help real, genuine victims. And it's because Hindus really don't bother to educate themselves about even those laws which are governing them. I find it very distressing that in the last few decades, in the last 4 decades, small foreign funded NGOs have completely monopolized this whole domain of legislation, social legislation, and even a lot of economic legislation, be it the Anti-Dowry Act, be it the Anti-Rape Law, be it the Right to Education Act, the Forest Act, this act, that act. Almost all of them have been pushed down our throats by foreign funded NGOs. And a society which passively allows foreign interests to rule over it, to decide what kind of laws are going to be governing your most intimate relations, those that reach right up to your bedroom, not just your char diwari compound of your personal home, but even your bedroom. If those laws, you don't even know what they are, and yet they are inflicted on you simply because well-heeled, well-connected, well-networked global NGOs, many of them supported by evangelical groups based in Western countries, and now, of course, increasingly even Islamic groups backed by petrodollars, the two in alliance, combined with then the Maoists. This Trimurti has actually monopolized the domain of legislation in India, and the Hindu society, the so-called majority community, remains happily oblivious. They are just made to sway on the strength of very pious sounding, progressive sounding slogans, and they say, yes, this must be banned because it's good for women, this must be done because it's good for XYZ. Just pious rhetoric has come to replace careful understanding and appreciation of the barikies of legislation. And a good law is one that acts like a surgeon's knife, not like a butcher's hatchet. Most of our laws are made to work like a butcher's hatchet, and they destroy the lot more than the organ that's supposed to be meant for treatment. Now, the first question we need to ask ourselves is the Uniform Civil Code good for Hindus or for Bharatvarsh? BJP has made it very clear that they are for Uniform Civil Code because they wish to give equal rights, protect the rights of Muslim women. Nobody's stopping them from protecting the rights of Hindu women. So obviously, if they think Uniform Civil Code is good for gender equity, then their constituency of concern is obviously Muslim women. Never mind that most Muslim women are not interested in gender justice. They're not interested in laws that will put them at par with women of other community. Because for them, their community's obsession with being special and being above the constitution, their Mazhabi concerns being above the constitution, being above the law of the land, is far more important than gender justice. So it's as I said, all the 3 women who came to Supreme Court and almost all the women activists from among the Muslim community that come on TV to present their case, they're all saying we want genuine Islamic Sharia law. They're not saying we want Uniform Civil Code. Not even a Shabana Azmi will stand up and say, what's this nonsense about Sharia? We're in a secular democratic country, and therefore we should be governed by secular democracy. No, they will not. They all join together to oppose it. Even though they may not in their personal lives live by Sharia dictates, they may be, like jinnah, pork eating, wine drinking, ayashes. But when it comes to the communal interest, they all gang up. And it's also very important for us to know that the smallest, youngest child in the most remote corner of India, if he's from the Muslim community, he zealously guards that turf. You try to touch anything to do with the Muslim community, within an hour, all of India's Muslims are together to defend what they think is their sacred domain, and nobody ought to touch it. Whereas Hindus have really no clue. Even when they're talking about uniform civil code, I don't think Hindus have asked themselves, is it really good for us? I think if I were to view it purely from the point of view of the Hindu community, a uniform civil code, especially if enforced forcefully, is a very, very bad idea. And why do I say that? I say that from experience, because all those of us who are aware of the rapid pace of conversions to Islam, ongoing conversions to Islam, and the rapid demographic changes that are taking place, with a lot of pockets within India, within secular India, emerging as mini Pakistans, and the proportion of Muslim population to Hindu population is increasing exponentially in many areas. One of the instruments of demographic manipulation is also love jihad. Now, thus far, most Hindu, Sikh, Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist women are afraid of marrying a Muslim precisely because of all the negativity and misogyny attached to Muslim personal law. They know that if they marry as per Sharia, and they have to, if they're marrying a Muslim, then the requirement is you convert. Once you convert, then you're governed by Sharia. And if you're governed by Sharia, it's not just the triple talaq that petrifies them, it's also practices, noxious practices like halala and polygamy. Your husband can lawfully have 4 wives. And you can be made to sleep with any number of men, including his own father. All these very noxious practices actually makes Hindu, Sikh, and Buddhist women somewhat cautious about marrying Muslim women or being seduced by them. Though too many of those very liberal, very avant-garde, kya fark padta hai, we are all same types, are now going for it. And many are coming back after being beaten and brutalized a few years later. But then it's too late. The point is that if a uniform civil code is made to appear like a living reality, then a lot of Hindu women who think, now we're safe, it doesn't really matter, we are protected. Even though we know that merely passing a law, the best of laws, doesn't change the social reality. And as far as the Muslim community is concerned, they're very capable of keeping alive the most noxious, the most hideous aspects of Muslim personal law alive, despite the enactment of a uniform civil code, on the sheer strength of brute power, brutal violence, and also willingness to slaughter, murder anybody who falls out of line. They're doing it all the time. A Muslim man, for example, a Hindu or a Sikh young man who falls in love with a Muslim girl invariably faces slaughter, because that's their dharmic, that's their mazhabi injunction. They don't care what the IPC has to say in the matter. And most of these cases are never pursued through courts. You will never find a single one of them ever punished, because they know how to manage the police and the law courts far more effectively than we do. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is that on the ground, Sharia will prevail, though you have an illusion of a uniform civil law on the, on the surface. And Hindu girls, Sikh girls, Buddhist girls are likely to become much easier victims of love jihad, because then they won't see the difference. And they would be led to believe that it's now they have the kind of protection that all others have. And that would be quite fatal, given the scale of this kind of seductive, strategy they're being actually trained, we know, not just in India, even in England, they are grooming gangs. They are given money. If you win over a Brahmin girl, you get so many lakhs. If it's a Rajput girl, so many lakhs. If it's a Dalit girl, it's far less money. So they have a price tag on Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist women or Jain women. And we need to be cautious about it, not just go without thinking what the consequences can be. However, I also believe that it is important. See, just as for Muslims, their emotional, psychic need to retain Muslim personal law, to not let any government touch it, so that they feel that they reign above the Constitution of India and the law of the land. That's the message they want to drive home wherever they are in significant numbers, be it England, even in England and France now they are demanding Sharia. Even in Europe they are demanding Sharia. In Canada they are demanding Sharia compliance for Muslims. So their aggression keeps growing, and they want to ensure that. Similarly, I think Hindus are motivated mainly by the desire to be able to say, no, you are at par with us. You can't claim special rights, so you have to have uniform civil code. I think that's the emotional pitch that Hindus are actually at. They're not thinking about it. They don't even know what a uniform civil code will look like, because most of them don't even know what Hindu Marriage Act, the Hindu Maintenance Law, the Hindu Domestic Violence, whatever other various laws actually are about. They get to know about them, the problems with those laws, only when they are in trouble. Otherwise, they never think it's important for them to know what kind of laws are governing. Now, it's important, I think, from a political standpoint, for the Muslim community to understand that they can't get away with being above the Constitution. So in some ways, it's important to bring in the Uniform Civil Code without a bloodbath in the country, because a bloodbath is what they're itching for. Mind you, they got India partitioned on the strength of a bloodbath, not on the strength of democratic votes. It's bloodbaths that have allowed Islam to spread the way it has. So it's not in our interest to allow that, unless you think you can match their ability to inflict violence. I don't think so. I don't think we can, especially since our government, the entire democratic regime that we have gets frightened easily, and there's always the global image to be worried about, and what will the Amnesty International say, and what will so-and-so say, etc. So we get to be weak-kneed. So I think we have to be a little smarter. Chanakya Niti is more important than allowing them the pleasure of a bloodbath, which, as I said, they're itching for. Now, how do we break this stalemate over UCC without entering into a bloody confrontation with the leaders of the Muslim and Christian community, also interestingly joining that mafia gang, the Tukde gang? And also that we can drive home the message that the government has the capacity to honor the directive principles of our constitution. And since Uniform Civil Code is part of that, I think it would be good to find a way to give it a legitimate space. Now, what is the formula I offer? This is what I had offered way back in 1985. And at that time, surprisingly, a lot of Muslim newspapers and organizations found my idea quite acceptable. I think that's because at that time they didn't know which way things were going. But today, of course, we don't know how they'll take it. But I think the Hindu community and the Sikhs need to understand um, the importance of an astute strategy um, of not making a uniform civil code um, a move that will create mayhem in the country and yet achieve its purposes. Okay. First is very simple. The secular courts of our country should simply stop adjudicating disputes on the basis of personal laws of any community. I don't understand why the secular regimes, especially those parties which are never tired of beating the drum of secularism, allow the secular courts of India to adjudicate on the basis of Hindu law, Muslim law, this, that, and the other. The state should confine itself to adjudicating cases only under the already existing secular laws, such as the Indian Marriage Act, the Indian Divorce Act, the Indian Succession Act, Indian Wards and Guardianship Act. Together, they constitute the core of uniform civil code. These may be and do need some improvements and updating as and when necessary. We can do that. But we already have this secular law. Now, all this means is that these laws alone become applicable to all citizens who knock the doors of the courts and approach secular courts irrespective of their caste, creed, gender, or religion or region. In other words, those who wish to be governed by by their religious personal laws, be it Hindus or Sikhs or Jains or Muslims or Christians, they should do so through their community organizations, through the religious leaders of their community, not through secular courts. Because these customary practices, which continue being, it's not just that Muslims are continuing with customary practices, many Hindu communities also privilege their customary practices over the Hindu Marriage, Hindu Succession Act, and all those secularized reform laws. For example, the Hindu Marriage Act doesn't put any restrictions on intercaste marriage or marriage within the same gotra. But most Hindus, and I would say even Muslims and Christians, despite their non-belief in caste, etc., do marry within their caste group. Do marry within, and avoid, Hindus would avoid very meticulously the gotra marriages, though Hindu Marriage Act has nothing to say to it. So the point that I'm trying to make is this, that if Muslims and Christians wish to be governed by their personal laws, then let them go to the church, let them go to the mosques, the padris and their religious community leaders, and the Sikhs can go to their gurdwaras and their granthis and have whatever they think is their customary Sikh law or customary Hindu law or customary Yadav practices or Reddy practices, and they do very considerably. Let them do that through their community organizations or their religious organizations, not come to secular courts to do so. Because actually, coming to think of it, our judges, trained as they are in Western jurisprudence, are hideously unqualified to adjudicate on these matters. We're expecting them to be mullahs and maulvis one day and go into the intricacies of Muslim personal law. I mean, if you read the Shaira Banu judgment, the 260 odd pages, it's so convoluted. It's all about the intricacies of Muslim personal law. And these Supreme Court judges are like Alice in Wonderland, you know, going through this maze and throwing quotes from here and there. You can tell that they haven't been able to stomach and digest them. But it's not even their training. Why are they being asked to do that? That's what I'd like to know. Similarly, our judges are very ill-informed about community practices, say, be it the Nayars of Kerala with their Maramakuttyam system, which in some form still stays, or in the Northeast, where matrilineal forms of inheritance and family structures still stay. They know nothing about it. And whenever I've gone to court with cases involving, say, tribal groups or whatever, our judges are really like, as I said, Alice in Wonderland. They don't know. They have to be tutored. They have to be fed, and whoever feeds them more effectively, whichever side and whatever is the preferred political order of the day, they go along with it. So they're actually not even competent to do it. But apart from that, the principle of it is wrong, that our secular courts ought not to be entertaining Muslim, Christian, Hindu, or any personal law. It should only be one. However, if one party to a family dispute feels dissatisfied with the verdict of the authority adjudicating customary law, let's say a Sikh woman or a Muslim woman or a Hindu woman feels that the customary law of a community, as decided upon, whatever relief is given to him or even a man, by the Biradari institution, the community institution, doesn't do justice, has trampled over his or her rights, then that person should have the freedom to come to the secular court and say, I'm dissatisfied with my community's version of customary law, and I wish to be governed by the secular law of the Indian state. So that there's always an option, but it's not a compulsion. Now, the Hindu community, I believe, should have no problem in abandoning the curious hybrid that goes in the under the name of Hindu Marriage Act, Hindu Succession Act, Hindu Divorce and Maintenance Act, Hindu Guardianship Act, etc., because there's very little Hindu left in them after the 1950s mangled reform, as well as subsequent amendments to these laws and newfangled laws brought in under the influence of foreign-funded NGOs. There's very little Hindu left to them, except a few rituals like Saptapadi, etc. But Saptapadi and those Sat Pheras are not common to Hindus all over India. We know very well that even those practices vary. And therefore, we ought not to have any emotional attachment to them. We should be happy to be governed by, give up the pretense of those laws being Hindu and be governed by secular Indian laws. And if our customary practices are superior to the Indian Succession Act, Indian Marriage Act, which in many cases they are, then by all means we should be able to preserve them. That's my point. Now, those who think that this kind of an optional and egalitarian civil code amounts to giving free hand to regressive elements within each community, or let's say giving the mullahs a free hand. A lot of people say, oh, but then these mullahs, that means to have a free hand, and then they'll make sure that only Muslim personal law stays. Now, let me make it very clear that laws benefit only those, or laws can be invoked to defend the rights of only those who actually seek the protection of the courts. They who go to police, who go to law courts and say, I wish this law to be applied to me because wrong is being done to me. If you don't go to court, for example, if a woman is being beaten by her husband, or vice versa, the best of anti-domestic violence laws will not help that person if she chooses not to complain to the police and not to go to law court. Similarly, if a woman does not complain against a husband bringing in 3 additional wives or having multiple partners every few years, if she doesn't complain, then no matter how strong the law against bigamy and whatever else, it's not going to help her one bit. Therefore, we should be clear that laws work only when a person seeks that protection. And in that sense, by having available, by making it clear that Muslim women cannot come to the courts of India, the Supreme Court or in the lower courts to say, please govern me by Sharia, please give me justice by Sharia. No, thank you. You have to go to the Maulvi for that. But if your Maulvi fails to do justice to you, then you can come to court and have the secular law applied to you, which will be uniform for all. And my point is this, I think we should consider this. Muslim leaders can't protest if UCC is optional, not coerced. They can't say, if they say, how can courts not take on Muslim personal law? We can ask them then that having secular judges, you don't even buy dal atta if it is not halal certified. And these courts are certainly not halal certified. So why do you want these secular, uneducated judges who don't know Sharia, who just have to be briefed like little kids? Why do you want them to adjudicate these matters? It is no better than having IS officers manage the affairs of mosques and deliver Friday's sermons or lead Eid prayers. You wouldn't allow that. So why do you allow Sharia to be adjudicated by secular non-Muslim? And most of the time judges are often non-Muslim. So why should non-Muslims be coerced into delivering verdicts on the basis of Sharia? Or why should I have the indignity of having ill-informed Christian or Muslim lawyers give me justice on the basis of their perceived notions, mostly ill-informed notions of Hindu law? So I really think that this needs to be understood well. And secondly, community neutral laws, if it's Indian Succession Act, it's Indian Marriage Act, these are community neutral laws. They will open the floodgates of reform within every community, including the Muslims. And I say this from experience. For example, the Anti-Dowry Act, with all its hideous provisions, it has a lot of flaws, or the Domestic Violence Act, or the Anti-Rape Law. Now, none of these carry the Hindu tag. And countless Muslim women have gone to court seeking redress under the IPC 498A for dealing with the marital cruelty, domestic violence, or under Domestic Violence Act, or under various other laws. Even Anti-Dowry Act is very often invoked by Muslim women and Christian women to deal with their husbands simply because they don't have the communal tag. Now, we lose nothing by getting rid of the communal tag and making sure that these community neutral laws become a little more nuanced, become a little better honed, and more reasonable, and more provide gender justice, are not just partisan in favor of women, but actually go for gender justice, which many of our laws don't. They actually violate the most elementary notions of gender justice. So I personally think that many more Muslim women will come to court seeking Indian marriage law and Indian Succession Act reliefs, Indian Guardianship Act relief for their children, if the Hindu tag is taken out, and if they know that they can't come to secular courts with the demand that judges give them Sharia-based justice. So this way, we have a uniform civil code, which has to be owned by all communities. We just have to abandon the communal tag to Hindu Marriage Act. Just get rid of those. They're quite redundant anyways. And the uniform civil code will be in place, available to all who seek its protection, shelter. And with it, let's also resolve to make our law courts places of delivering justice. At the moment, our police stations and our law courts are in serious trouble. I mean, they're the source of much grief in Indian society. And unless we fix the police and the law courts, then the best of laws won't work for anyone, not for Hindus, not for Muslims, not for anybody. So prioritizing police reform, judicial reform, and I have a lot to say on those subjects. How do we go about doing it? But adopting Chanakya Niti and not bull in a China shop approach with regard to uses. Thank you.
Dhanyawad Madhuji. I think that was a very insightful talk. A lot of good points, actually. So we'll now move on to the question and answer session. And I think before we start there, I just wanted to quickly say that we apologize for the delay initially that we had. I know a lot of you were in the waiting room, waiting to be kind of accepted into this webinar, but due to some technical difficulty, we had to delay it by 10 minutes. So, once again, I apologize for that.
And I apologize for taking a little more time than I should have.
Oh, that's okay. I think that was a much better investment of time than sitting around. Okay, so real quick, Madhuji, then we'll go to some questions. We have questions from all over the place coming in. So the first one is, I think based on what you have repeatedly said in your talk today, so regarding the talaq-e-biddat, right? So you said that women only approach the courts for that, but not all the other variations of talaq. So I guess the question then arises that if...
They've not yet challenged polygamy. They've
Correct.
not challenged halala, which is
correct.
not.
So if Muslim women...
Inheritance rights, Muslim women can at best get half share.
Right. So if the Muslim women themselves don't feel any sort of discrimination or anything wrong with these, all these other, perceived ills as we're claiming them to be, then who are we or anybody else to intervene and say that, no, you should fight for this as well?
I agree with you. You can't give, you can only take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And that's why I say the optional civil code is like taking the horse to water, saying, here it is, you want to drink it, it's there for you, like for all other horses. But you don't force feed the horse, lest you get kicked in your shit, and that's what the Modi government is likely to invite. I don't think Muslim women, and we saw, for example, the very same Muslim women who approached the government, sought its help, got assurances from Modi, we are with you, etc. During CAA, anti-CAA protests, when the Muslim leaders were out to burn India down, did they come and stand up for India? No, they didn't. They went along with the anti-CAA protests. So that clearly shows that they close ranks, even with their terrorists, the Burhan Wanis, the Sohrabuddins, the Mafia Dons, the Dawood Ibrahims, they're all sacred to them. They all close ranks. The liberals, the Shabana Azmis, the Javed Akhtar, the Sabah Naqvis, they're all together defending the worst social practices as well as the worst criminals of the world, provided they happen to belong to their religious denomination. And therefore, we better understand that we should pick our battles carefully. And we have not understood. Hindus have been brutalized by Islam for 1,000 years, but we haven't learned the lesson. We haven't learned to deal with the community and its aggression and its determination at world domination. Its determination at decimation of Hindus. They can't decimate you if they become like you, right? They can't decimate and they can't be world conquerors if they become just like anybody else. They have to remain distinct, and so distinct that others are petrified of them. So I do think that we should think more for what's good for India, what's good for Hindus, and make sure you drive home the message that you can't get away with being above law, above constitution, but at the same time, leave Muslim women to fight their own battles.
Okay, so the next question is, how does uniform civil code that you are proposing, or in general, let's say even the government is considering, affect the cultural and social practices of the Vanvasi population? Also, there's a second part to it. Could bringing in a uniform civil code ultimately destroy the diversity within the Hindu dharma in Bharat?
Absolutely. Very pertinent questions, and I'm glad you're bringing them in. Firstly, let's talk about the Vanvasi population. And since I had dealt with, one of the earliest PILs on behalf of tribal women that ever came to Supreme Court, I think was mine in 1981, challenging the denial of land rights to them. Firstly, as with Hindu personal law, which is actually Anglo-Saxon version of what they thought was Hindu law, codified Hindu law, the English, the colonial law. They've done the same thing with tribal communities. Tribal communities had no, firstly, you call them Vanvasis, rightly. Tribal is a hideous misnomer, and there's a whole politics behind it. So we should not call them tribals. Firstly, the forests have disappeared. So therefore, there are fewer and fewer Vanvasis. And especially with reservations, many of them are moving out. The moment they get even a bit of education, so they're not there dying to live on the basis of forests. Their desire, like that of everybody else. And many of these communities, as you well know, were pushed into forests during Mughal rule because they offered resistance, and during colonial British rule because they offered the fiercest resistance, and therefore they were driven into forests. So they sought refuge in forests. Those forests are not there. The character of those communities has changed dramatically. And what goes by the name of tribal customary law is actually a colonial intervention that I demonstrated in my PIL, challenging the denial of land rights to tribal women. For instance, most of them used to have communally owned land, no notion of private, a whole community owns it, or at least a whole family. Now, the British made it in the interest of tax collection. They made it individual, family owned, headed by a male, so only male. They introduced male monopoly over land, even in tribal areas. And tribal women have been battling, including in the Northeast. But they are trampled upon, their voices are trampled upon, because the whole politics has been leave them alone. And leave them alone essentially means leave them at the mercy of Christian missionaries. Most of them have been converted earlier to Christianity. Now, most of them, a large-scale conversions also happening, especially in central India, to Islam. So, अब क्या बचेगा उनका वनवासी culture? We need to be careful when we think that people can live isolated, unless it's by choice. Those isolationist enclaves were not necessarily of choice. And secondly, what is being projected by the British as tribal customary law was their invention. These were not their own practices. And otherwise, in most essential matters, they're not very different. The culture is not very different from Hindu community. We believe in ancestor worship, they do. We believe in nature worship, they do. We believe in X, Y, the similarities are far greater with the Hindu community. And it's when they convert to Islam or Christianity that they lose their culture. Hindus have never forced those communities to lose their culture. Now, as far as diversity is concerned, I do believe it's important to let that survive, because our traditional practices We are seeing, including now in the day and age of Corona, our traditional food practices, Hindu practices, are being vindicated. They're not traditional, they're just good sense, common sense. They're like Sanatan Dharma. There's something very Sanatani about our food habits. There's very Sanatani. They're valid anywhere because their value is based on well thought out principles. And this diversity could survive. India could survive with this mind boggling diversity precisely because we had what even Marx observed as self-governing village republics. Each community could define its own laws. No community, no matter how wealthy or whatever, could dictate to another community how to run its internal affairs. Even today, that holds quite a bit. And when somebody in India, say among the Hindus, defends their social practice, they'll never say, oh, it's because it's written in that Shastra. They say, hamare yahan aisa hi hota. And those practices are changed, refashioned, reformed very seamlessly whenever the community feels the need to bring about those changes. And that spontaneity and inner urge to improve upon your practices is very important. And that's why I say optional civil code. Because we've destroyed matrilineal communities, we've destroyed communities which provided women far greater rights than the Hindu code bill could even ever imagine. And we have brought about, literally turned our families into battlegrounds. You know, jange maidan ban gaye hain hamare ghar. Thanks to the kind of divorce laws, false charges, fake charges, the kind of provisions we have, it allows unscrupulous people and families to tear asunder families, destroy lives. So we need to, with that diversity also, it means our community organizations have to be strong enough to be able to mediate disputes. Dispute resolution mechanisms within each community. Our local community temple should be the place where 90% of disputes, marital disputes, family disputes are sorted out. If you go to courts, then the outcome is usually tearing asunder of the social fabric, especially given the nature of courts that we have. And the Western jurisprudence system is not oriented towards justice. It's oriented only towards, smart lawyer, well paid, whoever can argue the case better, fool the judges, or bribe the judges, wins the day. So I'm all for traditional community mechanisms where there's no expense and everybody knows the facts of the case because the two parties are speaking for themselves. They're not speaking through lawyers.
So Madhuji, that's an interesting take because on one side, you're saying that, a lot of communities just say ki hamare yahan to aisa hi chalta hai, and there's no reference to any shastras, right? So could the point that maybe bringing the shastras back in to this to say that, hey, this is how we're going to reform the Hindu code bill, would that be a better approach to, because you also mentioned that you don't want a bloodbath, right? So if you go the UCC route, making it optional, there's always going to be interpretations. We saw how misinterpretation of a CAA led to so much chaos. So what's the guarantee that, misinterpretation of an optional?
Dealing with the Muslim community is a different ball game altogether. Let's first deal with our own. Firstly, we've stopped dealing with our own. And that's why we don't know how to deal with the outside world. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is this. Even our Shastras, including Manusmriti, all our Shastras, and I urge you to read my paper on the Hindu Code Bill, where I quote a lot of our Shastras, which have repeatedly emphasized that our laws have to be time specific, and that's why we call it customary law. It's not written in stone. There is no Shastra which says my word is final. We don't have the equivalent of 10 commandments. We do not have the equivalent of a Quran which says thou shalt do this or else rot in hell, burn in hell. No. We only, even our great epics, the Ramayana, for example, shows you the code of conduct this society considers reverence worthy. But it doesn't say, unless you are a brother like Lakshman, we will slaughter you. No. It holds these worthies as role models, but that's it. You take as much of it as you want to. So also all the Shastras. Now, the diversity that prevailed, like for example, till 19th century, large parts of India, not just Kerala, but many other parts of South India, especially those pockets of India which escaped ruthless, unremitting Islamic invasions, were matrilineal. Women had very strong property rights. It's only in the north, which was being plundered constantly and women being captured as sex slaves and as concubines in harems, that women were confined within the parda, the chardivari, the ghungat, the equivalent of the burqa among Muslims, because you had to, that was a distress response. And therefore, even the economic rights were somewhat circumscribed. But even there, Sridham is very different from dowry, as different from, as chalk is from cheese. Now, we've lost all that. If you have to recover it, you have to allow society to decide in what measure it wants to take from the past, in what measure. But at least they should know what they had, what they lost, and how bad the current legal regime is with regard to peace in the family and health of our social, preserving the health of our social fabric. Divorce, for example, let me tell you, where marriages take place within the community circle, with people knowing each other, each other's history. There are people to stand guarantee for. There's far less divorce than marriages that are taking place through newspaper ads, where, whether it's self-arranged or even so-called love marriages. I call them self-arranged marriages. I don't call them love marriages, because a love marriage is one where love survives through years of marriage, not where you see somebody and you want to jump into bed with him and you call it love marriage simply because you decided you find him attractive for this, that, and the other reason. But if you can actually carry that relationship through years of joyful togetherness, then it deserves to be called a love marriage. Otherwise, it's only a self-arranged marriage.
Okay. So we have a slightly, different style of question than we've had so far. The question comes in as, why did you call yourself a naive Gandhian, and what has changed since?
I called myself a naive Gandhian because I actually genuinely believed in unconditional commitment to nonviolence, till I began to realize, as I saw the way, the terrorist violence in Kashmir and its impact, all these subversive movements out to destroy India, that Gandhi understood Sanatana Dharma only partially. He carried forward the Mughal and the British legacy of disarming Hindus. The Mughals disarmed us, the British disarmed us, but he made a virtue out of keep taking, turn the other cheek and don't retaliate. The way we succumbed to the partition and thereafter, and we kept on and on saying, you raped us 1,000 times, we're ready for 1,000 more. I think Gandhi did not know how to deal with Islamic aggression, Islamic genocides, and he thought his sainthood could win their hearts. It couldn't. He was badly defeated, not just by Jinnah, but also by Nehru. And he snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory by disarming Hindus, by isolating and discarding the Subhash Boses and the Bhagat Singhs, and going on with this dhimmi Macaulay Putra named Nehru, even marginalizing Sardar Patel, who did not believe in turning the other cheek. He wanted to defend Bharatvarsh with all the power at his, but he disabled even Sardar Patel from doing so. So it came to me very late. It seemed so ennobling, and I would say I would rather die with a defeated Gandhi than stand with a victorious Jinnah. And I think that's dimitude. I don't want us Hindus to have this death wish and feel moral about it. No, there's no great morality in being brutalized, in letting your motherland be raped repeatedly. You know, we had a whole Mahabharat just because one Draupadi was sought to be disrobed. Just one Draupadi sought to be disrobed. And we had a whole Mahabharat. He was not forgiven. And here, for 1,000 years, lakhs and lakhs of Hindu women have been abducted, enslaved, put in harems, and the Mansinghs and the Todarmals even offered their daughters to be part of those Mughal harems, and they were sold in Middle East. We've not figured out a response. The same thing happened during partition, and we didn't learn from history. Now, no more. My resolve, it's come late in life, but then, you know, we were kept so ill-informed. We were not even allowed to pronounce words like Ghazwa-Hind. It's only when I became familiar with terms like Ghazwa-Hind, that's their stated agenda. So my God, I mean, are we being prevented from recognizing that stated agenda so that we are not prepared? And that's why we've seen, for example, hundreds of mini Pakistans have emerged in India post-partition. We weren't vigilant.
Okay. So here's another question that's coming in. I think kind of changing gears back to the UCC. Is the current law commission properly equipped to study the need for UCC, its effects, and the future course?
No, not at all. Not one bit. And I tell you, if we submit it to the law commission, let me tell you that I pleaded with 2 successive chairpersons of the law commission saying, please appoint a task force to review the misuse, routine large-scale misuse of various laws, notably the domestic violence laws, the Anti-Dowry Act, the Anti-Rape Law, and even the Anti-Feticide Act. You know, they're so grossly crafted. I've analyzed them clause by clause right at the outset when they were coming, and I predicted these are going to be the outcomes. Mine was the lone voice for long years. And now people are seeing that everything I said is going to happen, has started happening, is now happening on a mass scale. So I've been pleading with various law ministers, including the current law minister, as well as the law commission chairpersons, saying, please appoint a task force to see where these laws have gone wrong. Please take feedback, do a review. Each one of them, whether of the Congress or of the BJP, says, please don't expect us to commit harakari. This is political suicide. You do it, Madhuji. You fight this battle. Very heroic of you. But, you know, your feminist sisters will chew us alive. We can't take them on. I mean, they're so petrified. Earlier, the Congress ministers would also say, please convince Sonia ji, we can't do anything. But in this case, the BJP has been absolutely no different, not one bit different with regard to laws. They don't apply their mind. And anytime new laws have come, which have been pushed down our throat by leftists, the CPM lobby, the foreign funded NGOs, I've pleaded with various BJP leaders, please at least read my critique of them. When I've gone to court, I have pleaded with the law minister saying, please at least read my submissions before your law officers appear in court to oppose them. They don't do it. I mean, I had to appear in person on behalf of Panchayats because they sought to outlaw them on patently bakwas charges, you know. These are community organizations, millennia old, and they had drafted a law to outlaw it till we intervened, and at least we were able to stall that law. But you see the responses of the BJP government. The Law Commission had actually drafted a law at the behest of the Supreme Court banning Khap Panchayats. Invite me some other day to give you a lecture on that whole nightmare that was conducted with the full cooperation of the Supreme Court against our traditional panchayats on the basis of fake data provided by Christian evangelical groups who want to destroy these institutions. We've allowed our traditional institutions of conflict resolution, dispute resolution to be destroyed. And I think you can't preserve diversity if you have no dispute resolution mechanisms locally. Because that's where the genius, the local genius of how to interpret what is fair, what is dharmic, what's right conduct, you know, it's there that the creativity of society and its inner urge for justice, fair play, and social stability comes into play.
So then, Madhuji, it seems like this is starting to become more of a perception battle, if I'm not mistaken, right? So in this perception battle, because, you know, taking the Khap Panchayat case that you had just mentioned, right? There was so much negativity because I think all of us were kind of fed this notion that, you know, these cops are basically run by, you know, generally older people who are outdated and rigid in their thinking, and they're trampling upon constitutional freedoms. You know, I'm just giving a scenario here. So in that sort of a situation, then what are supposed to be the steps to kind of minimize that narrative damage? And especially for urban, educated, colonized audience, you know, and again, I use those terms in quotes because, you know, for educated, I think what the reference here is that those who, once they go to college, they feel that, okay, now I have a certification saying I'm educated, but lack the critical thinking.
See, firstly, you have to have a live interest in law and know laws that deserve to be junked, thrown into the garbage, and those that need to be improved upon and strengthened, and how to craft legislation with astute care. We don't do that. And our lawyers have no interest in making good laws because they make money from bad laws. Our judges couldn't care less because they are on the payroll of all those wrongdoers. They make their money from wrongdoers too. We have a very corrupt judiciary, right to the top. Now, who has an interest? The police has no interest because they get their bribes from the corrupt, from the criminals, from the wrongdoers. The honest citizen is not going to offer anything to them. So all those who are guardians of our legal system have a vested interest in abuse of the laws, making them ham-handed, making them crude, gross, and keeping the ordinary janta ignorant about them. Most of our laws, you know, even well-educated people can't understand. They're so convoluted. Even the anti-dowry law, if I just read out the definition of dowry, your head will spin. You know, I'm going to make a presentation on that on my YouTube channel. You see it and I'm telling you, your head will swim. Go for a spin. They're that badly crafted. When your lawmakers don't even know how to define a crime accurately, when they make laws that can't, for example, distinguish between death due to suicide, death due to murder, death due to accident, if they're all put together in one category, obviously you'll think whoever made such a law is a nutcase. But they made precisely those kind of laws, and nobody's bothered, nobody reads them. I'm one of those obsessive ones, simply because I began doing legal aid for victims of domestic violence and abuse, etc., at a very young age. And though I didn't have legal training, and there weren't many places where women or aggrieved people, and then of course legal aid for the urban poor, the street vendors, the rickshaw pullers, and other aggrieved communities. So I had to educate myself. And I was more interested in evaluating how laws work at the ground, not how they sound, how pious they sound on paper. We get content with just pious sounding, strict sounding laws. And whenever a law fails, we say, make it more strict. And then that gets even more easy to abuse for extortion, bribery, and harassment of innocents.
So then just as a counter data point, then, what about in a situation, because look, going back to the cop example, right? There have been misuse of that as well. And you had mentioned earlier that, ideally you should let the people in the certain community kind of go to the local temple or local, some authority figure to kind of deal with these personal law issues. But if that body itself is compromised,
doesn't
right,
matter.
then
I'm saying community pressure will make people behave better. That's their problem. I mean, say for example, I may prefer to go to a Khap Panchayat than to go to the High Court of Delhi any day, because I know I'll get a hearing, better hearing than I will in courts where I'll have to pay expensive lawyers. But that will be my choice, right? If I have confidence, though even those institutions have been hideously compromised, but because the government has made them effete. Political parties try to capture all these traditional institutions, including resident welfare, mohalla committees. They want their people everywhere. So they will try to capture community panchayats, like, say, the Patel community has a very viable inner panchayat system, community dispensations. The Marwari community rarely goes to court to sort out its business dealings. They do it within the community. But the moment a community allows politicians to come and take over those institutions and lord over them, then they're finished. You have to keep politicians at bay of each party. No party is different in this. The CPM politician will do exactly the same thing of destroying the body health. On the healthiest institution, community institution, you put one bureaucrat, one politician, and believe you me, they'll act like AIDS virus. In no time, the institution is destroyed. When they can't maintain the integrity of their own turf, if the politicians can't maintain the integrity of their political domain, how can they be guardians of our temples or community organizations or our panchayats? So I think the communities where biradari mediation is still very active. There's low divorce rate, there's less abuse, there's less domestic violence. For example, families will not give their daughters into those homes where there have been divorces or where there is reported cases of domestic violence. वहाँ उनके लड़के को ब्याह नहीं कोई करेगा ऐसे family में. That acts as a big disincentive. Your reputation among your community that you beat your bahu out, that keeps a lot of families sane. And where that community watch stays, that's where the diversity is maintained, the integrity is maintained, and your family system is kept safe. So
So,
I think that if we have to have uniform civil code, each one of us should start making notes. What should be the principles on which our family life should be governed? Each one of us should think about our own families and say, how would I like my daughter? What rights do I want for my daughter? What rights do I think are owed to my wife, to my father, to my mother, to my sister, to my, that's how our families used to operate. We didn't think of rights only in terms of husband, wife. We thought of rights of even unborn children. And even those were protected under traditional customary practices. So if we start thinking and saying, what do I owe my old grandmother? What rights does she have on me? And what responsibilities? Or each one, it's a case of both rights and responsibilities. Whereas in the modern lingo, there's only rights, no responsibility.
so Madhuji, we have, I think, a couple of more questions left. So one I wanted to get to was, what do you think the effect of not having UCC so far has done on the social divide that you see in India?
It has made the Hindu community feel very aggrieved and effete. If the majority community feels that, we are trampled upon, all kinds of newfangled, very harmful laws are also imposed on us without even asking us, but nobody dare touch laws of the so-called minority, which has a veto power over everything, then it's not conducive to communal harmony. And that resentment has destroyed the self-confidence of the Hindu community. That has made our politicians appear hapless, useless, compromised, and the democracy, therefore, because they do it on account of vote bank politics or whatever else. So even the faith in democracy, this kind of democracy, is severely eroded. I don't respect this democracy precisely because it's made monkeys out of all our leaders. When you see them make hideous compromises, even when matters of national security are involved, our civilizational survival are involved, they make only because of vote bank politics. You can't respect such a democracy. So I think we need to rethink all this.
So you say you don't respect our democracy, but how much of the onus lies on the politician and how much of that onus lies on the people? Because, a politician, I would say, is more like, let's say, it's a job that he or she is doing and will cater to the customer.
No, traditionally, I think traditional India, which was celebrated as a land of self-governing republics, was more democratic because power rested for most things with the community itself. It didn't have to look for approval above. It was economically self-sufficient, most communities. I mean, there's good work done pre-British India, how they devastated the economic life. Also, that can be done only if the community is also sufficiently wealthy, produces enough surplus to be able to look after all its needs. And that's what pre-British India was about, and pre-Islamic India certainly even more so. So I think that decision making, localized, not accountable to up there, from the prime minister to the chief minister to the district magistrate it devolves from there. No, I can't today take charge even over my own immediate neighborhood. I'm dependent on the municipality, which doesn't listen to me, on a police which is not accountable to me. So actually we are disempowered by this version of very colonial-minded democracy. It has given citizens no real power except the power to vote out X, Y, Z. But then there too, money power, muscle power matters. And that's why in the constituency I live in, we have this Amanatullah Khan with a lot of, that kind of politician who's a money bag, muscle bag, money and muscle power, basically, uh, and the ability to buy vote banks, buy the police, all that matters. Look at the kind of politicians we are elected. We are electing because who can survive? Can honest people survive as candidates in the kind of election process we have, whether in America or here? Uh, Look at what it costs to fight an election. And then for 5 years, nobody can touch you. Then you come back to ask for votes. But then what does an MP have by way of power? The real power at one level is with the bureaucracy, who are not elected, who are not accountable, who are transferred from one job to the other. It's like musical chairs in in bureaucratic offices. So we created a messy system. We didn't dare decolonize our administration. And on top of it, all we did is we kept the system that the British left behind. Then we added to it 5-yearly election, and we called it a great democracy. No, thank you. And even the Constitution of India is based on the what was that act? The India Act of 1935 that the British had drafted. It's not by the people of India. See the kind of people who sat in the Constituent Assembly. So we haven't thought these things through. The freedom fighting generation, many of them did think it through. You read the parliamentary debates of 1950s, and they're very elevating because people are pointing to all these things in the most astute manner, the flaws of the system. They understood it much better then. Today, we've been fooled into complacency by the democratic rhetoric that's fed to us.
Correct. So I think we'll go with the last question for today, based on the interest in time. So last question, Madhuji, is, kind of going back to one of the first questions I was asked was that if women from the Muslim community are not even interested in demanding rights, which we are considering here civic and normal, then how do you drive home this message among the hyper-seculars who consider their needs the same as Hindu women? How do you drive this message home if the other person isn't even demanding?
First, it's not that they're not interested. It's just that they put their community interest and their mazhabi interest above their self-interest. And that's because most Muslims have been charged with this vision that they are meant to rule the world. And you have to be a global ruling power. And you do that only if you stay together. And that vision, they're planning 500,000 years ahead. And we don't even plan 5 hours ahead. That's our problem. With that vision of world domination, they're able to then persuade members of their community to make their self-interest subservient. And that's why they do that. Or, they make allowances for differences in private life. Okay, you don't have to wear burqa. So Shabana Azmi can smoke and drink and do whatever she likes, but she will be considered a good Muslim simply because she stands up. Or a Saba Naqvi, there's nothing Islamic about her personal life, but she will stand up to defend even a Burhan Wani, even terrorists, and even Pakistani jihadis. So they are able to find ways in which to keep themselves together, especially to deal with the outsiders, the non-Muslims. As far as how do you do that? Now, I gave you the example that the urge for getting rights at power with Hindus is also strong. It can't be written off, which is why all those laws which don't carry the Hindu tag are being used by Muslim women, increasingly so. And so if we just remove the communal tag and told them, you can't come to us for Sharia, go to your mosque for Sharia, Go to Owaisi brothers for Sharia compliance. We don't deal with Sharia because this is secular India and the courts are governed on secular principles. Then they will have no choice but to seek justice. And if they feel they're not being Hinduized in the process, more are likely to do so than if a uniform civil code is made compulsory. But it can't be compulsory anyway. You see, you can only call it compulsory, but it can't be because if people don't go to court, then it's not compulsory, right? The law becomes operational only when I knock the doors of the court or the police station. So, firstly, make your police stations and law courts people friendly, citizen friendly, or let people manage with their, and which is one of the reasons why among Muslims, very few cases come to court. Muslim versus Muslims, you will find very few cases because they have far better mechanisms for solving inner community conflicts and disputes. We don't have them. We are losing them. We have them, but we have abandoned them because as we modernize, the first thing we do is to distance ourselves from our own community, from our own neighborhood. You don't even know them. How will you seek their help? So, reviving community organizations and strengthening the family system, including the extended family, is the only way to save our civilization. Atomized individuals and nuclearized, unstable families will definitely sound the death knell of Hindu civilization, even if there are no external enemies come to attack.
Okay. Thank you so much, Madhuji. I think this was a very enlightening talk for all of us. I know, as I said earlier, we have a lot of youth on this call, a lot of youth.
I'd like to get their feedback, and I invite you to write back to me. I don't know where you'll be posting your comments, but you could also write to me at madhukishwar@manushi.in. I repeat, madhukishwar, KISHWAR @manushi, MANUSHI.in, because I never got to interact with the viewers directly. So therefore, I'm appealing through your platform that I would like to get a feedback from them.
Correct. And we shared the email address you just gave us through the chat that went to everyone. And then one more thing is we will link the papers that Madhuji has referenced today on the YouTube description. So please be on the lookout for that. So I think as we wrap up today, I just wanted to once again thank Bharatiyam and Awaz for putting this talk together, inviting me to moderate. I've been a big fan of Madhuji for lots of years, watching her videos on YouTube. So maybe I just got lucky that I got to interact with you today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, Awaz, again, I just want to remind everyone, is an initiative to provide a platform to fundamentally think, communicate, and reason about the current systems in the world. Awaz aims to ponder, act, and create awareness about various issues by writing blogs, organizing webinars, etc., as we experience today. So again, the link to Awaz and Bharatiyam will also be on the YouTube description. So Madhuji, as I said again, thank you so much for taking the time out. I know it's quite late in Delhi right now, and yeah, you probably want to sip a drink of water and then go to sleep.
Okay, namaste.
Thank you so much. Namaste.
Look forward to your feedback.
Namaste, everyone.